Hello to everyone. It looks like we're absolutely going to max here. I'm going to ask, I think, Jay, if you can mute everybody except for me, Todd, and Gary, or if you have a chance down at the bottom left top of your screen, you'll see mute.
Yeah, I'm going to mute everybody, and then
Okay.
you guys come back in. Okay.
For them to hear me, they'll unmute. Okay. Well,
All right. I think everybody's muted now. I'm off mute. And good. Well, welcome everybody. You are the fortunate 500 that got in here because obviously Gary's very popular. So anyway, it's awesome to see all of you. I'm James Anderson. I'm the executive partner of the NCS National. And it's incredible to see all these faces and all the different places people are coming in from. So thank you for making the time to join us tonight. Wherever you are, I've seen we've got every time zone represented. So thank you. It's also great to see a lot of wives because, well, you're the roses among the thorns, thank God. So very glad you guys are here, and thank you for joining. So, you know, if we've got 500 devices on here, that's, you know, a lot of those are holding 2 people. And so what an incredible thing to get to have all of you with us. So let me just give you a couple of rules of the road and how we're going to do this. We are going to, I'm going to just do a quick intro here, kick us off, and then hand it over to Todd Chase, who's going to do our interview. And then he and Gary will share. And then at the end, at any point, you're welcome to submit some questions. And so if you're on a computer, it'll be right down here. It says chat. If you're on an iPhone or an iPad, it's probably right up here that says chat. And so you'll be able to just submit your questions. You can submit them to everybody so people can see if they're duplicates. I'm going to compile them. We'll get them to Todd, who will be able to ask the questions once we get to the end. So at any point, if you want to send in some questions that maybe some specifics, we will absolutely keep those going. But we're in for a great night. So to the ladies and to the families, I just want to say a special welcome to you. We, as the men in chapters of the New Canaan Society, have enjoyed a surprising blessing coming out of this coronavirus craziness and the story that we're all living in together with the restrictions and things like that. And it has been an incredible surprise to see across the country so many men joining our meetings, and there's been great intimacy and great connection and great discussion. And I think that when the rest of the world is on fire and a lot of things are kind of collapsing, we are experiencing a real growth in just a beautiful interaction among men. So I love having you guys here. We thank you for joining us, and we just wanted to extend some of the amazing things we've seen with you so that you can experience a bit of what we're experiencing. And we wanted to just try out this little idea here, and obviously since we've maxed out, it's popular. So congratulations, you won the lottery of the 500. So everyone will be muted until the end, and I'll kick it over to Todd here in a minute, and Todd will do some moderating with Gary. And feel free to submit your questions again right here through the chat, or right here if you're on a phone or an iPad. And so that's how we'll do the Q&A time. With that, let me just open us in prayer real quick for our time, and I'll kick it over to Todd. So, Father God, what an incredible thing to see so many people again joining us, and an opportunity for great blessing for not just our men, but for their families and for their wives and spouses. And I'm so thankful for Gary and his tremendous expertise and the research and the blessing that you've given him to be able to compile this incredible body of knowledge and then be able to so effectively share it. And so I pray that you'd bless our time tonight. Give us a favor with technology, which is always the great barrier in this time that we're in. And Father, I just pray that you would bless each and every family that's here with us tonight, and that you would, Father, that you would bless our time and help us to take away real practical and tactical tips from tonight. Help us to learn well so that we can love well. And we thank you for the blessing of this time, for your Spirit's leading and just watching over us. So I just pray for a covering for this time right now. And as Gary teaches and shares with us, and that, Lord, we pray for our country and our leaders. We pray for our economy, which is being so drastically impacted. Pray for so many of the men in our movement who have been deeply impacted already, and for what's going to happen in the future. And I just pray, Father, for your great protection over all these. We pray for our communities, our churches, our families, our jobs, our coworkers, and that you would, Father, use this moment to draw people to yourselves, as you are the God that redeems people to your Son. And so we lift all this up, Father, and we lay it at your feet. And it's because of your Son that we have the opportunity to even pray like this. And it's in his name. Amen. So, guys, Todd Chase is going to lead us through this. And I just want to say he's been a great brother. He's been around NCS for a long time, active member in our Winston-Salem chapter. And Todd has just been someone I've personally enjoyed getting to know very well, and he's blessed our movement over many years. So with that, Todd, over to you, my friend, and I will let you take it from here and lead us through.
Awesome. Thanks, James. It's great to be with everybody, and really happy with the turnout. And I guess one advantage of this crazy coronavirus era we're going through is that we can put together an event like this that was just an idea that was mentioned on a phone call a week ago, and have it pulled together with probably 800 to 900 people on a Zoom line with Gary Chapman within a week. So it's awesome. I've got my wife Becca with me, and we're just thrilled to be moderating this conference with Gary. And Gary's somebody that I've known for almost 20 years now, and it's been a real blessing. He's truly a hero of mine for many reasons, but I'm sure most of y'all know him from his incredible series of books on the 5 love languages, which now have been translated into over 50 languages. He's written over 50 books. And I believe, Gary, that the love languages have now sold over 13 million copies. And I think last time we talked, they're still selling more every year than they did the year before, which just shows that it's got an enduring popularity and is just a perennial on the top 10 list on the New York Times bestsellers. Gary's an author, he's a counselor, he's a pastor, and he's just got a great and giving heart. And I'm sure he may be having to adjust to going a little stir crazy as well, because he's usually on the road and has a schedule that would make all the rest of us blush, because this guy's never not busy. But Gary, I just want to first say thanks so much for being with us today. Well, we got to get you off mute, Gary.
What?
Yeah, there you go.
Hello?
We got you.
Okay. Yep. Okay. Yeah, it's great to be with you and all the folks with the New Canaan Society. Deeply appreciate what you guys do on a regular basis. It's just exciting. So I'm glad to be with you tonight.
We appreciate it. And Gary, I guess to kind of kick things off, I'll just kind of throw out, during this this time that we're in right now, can you just discuss, how the love languages fit in, and the kind of the impact they have on a marriage during a time of, sheltering in place, social distancing, coronavirus. It's just a crazy, crazy time right now.
Well, it is, and all of us are adjusting to it. But I think, you know, whether we're in the midst of a crisis or whether things are going what we would call normal, the deep need to feel loved by the significant people in our lives, almost everyone agrees it's our deepest emotional need on the human level. And if you're married, the person who would most like to love you is your spouse. You know, if you feel loved by your spouse, then you can handle whatever comes along. If you don't feel loved by your spouse, life can begin to look pretty dark. And in a crisis situation like this, all the worst of us tends to come out. And a marriage can be very, very stressful in this time. And that's why I think understanding the love languages, particularly understanding your spouse's love language and choosing to speak it during this time will create a positive climate between the two of you, so that it will be much easier to process whatever you're facing in the midst of this. So, yeah, I think it's extremely important that we keep love alive. We meet that emotional need for love. And the love languages helps us do that in an effective manner.
Awesome. You mentioned that if we're at a point in our marriage where maybe we're not feeling that from our spouse, we're not getting that love to kind of get us through, or they're not getting it from us. What are kind of some of the first steps that we can take to try to make things better right now?
Well, you know, of course, a lot depends on where we were before this started. If we had a troublesome marriage before this, or if we had a distant marriage, that we were just living in the same house, but we were coming and going and just trying to be civil to each other, then that's one thing. You have to start at one place. If you had a fairly good marriage beforehand, you just build on that foundation. But I think particularly if you were struggling or just kind of distant and you were kind of just floating along, one of the places to start is with a conversation that just says, honey, in the middle of all of this, how are you feeling? How are you feeling about us? How are you feeling about the situation we're in? Is there anything I could do that might be helpful to you during this time? You know, we often talk about, let's sit down and talk. I think that's the wrong thing. We need to sit down and listen. We're not trained to listen. We're trained to talk. You know, if we sit down, one of us will probably say, honey, I've been thinking, and I think we ought to do this and this and this and this and this. Okay, you're talking, but were they prepared to listen? Probably not. And so you're going to talk and share your ideas, and then they're going to say, well, I don't think that'll work. And you're in an argument. Wouldn't it be better to start the conversation by asking them to share with you what they're thinking and what they're feeling? So now you've opened the door on your side to hear them, and you've given them permission. And now they can share what their thoughts are, what they're feeling, and ideas on what you might do that would make things better. And once you do that, you've listened to them, then they'll probably ask you, well, honey, what are you thinking? And what are you feeling? And what could I do to make things better for you? That's the place to begin, is with that kind of conversation. But most of us are not trained to listen. If we sit down to talk, we're going to start talking rather than asking. If you think in terms of asking questions before you talk, you create a much easier flow in the conversation, and chances are that conversation is going to bring you to some positive things that each of you can do that would enhance the relationship.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think sometimes we just need to be able to humble ourselves too, and just admit that we don't know, we don't have all the answers, and just to ask that question instead of telling each other what we think. I think that's a great point. Just curious, I mean, you're used to being, normally you probably would have been in like 8 or 10 different cities here in the last month or two. Now you and Carolyn are sheltering in together at home. Any challenges or adjustments you've had to make personally there at home?
Well, we don't have any children at home. So she's cooking and I'm washing dishes. Things are going pretty well. And I'm doing a lot of interviews like we're doing today, a lot of interviews. And she's on the phone a lot, talking to, widows that in our church fellowship and her friends, and just kind of keeping up with people and family, extended family. So she's staying busy, with that. I'm staying busy doing interviews and also doing some writing. Of course, I'm always writing, and it's a good time to write. There are not a lot of distractions. So we're really doing well.
Good. I guess it's good for the 5 love languages guy that he's doing well with his spouse during this time. So Gary, can you maybe just real briefly for people that maybe aren't as familiar, just give a real quick overview over what the 5 love languages are?
Yeah, sure. And I discovered these in my counseling, because over and over couples would sit in my office and say, one of them would say, I just feel like he doesn't love me or she doesn't love me. And the other would say, well, I don't understand that. I do this and this and this. Why would you not feel loved? So I knew people were missing each other. So what I did really was to sit down and read several years of notes that I made when I was counseling and ask myself, when someone said, I feel like my spouse doesn't love me, what did they want? What were they complaining about? And their answers fell into 5 categories, and I later called them the 5 love languages. So here they are, in no particular order. Words of affirmation, using words to affirm the other person. You look nice in that outfit, really appreciate what you did. One of the things I like about you, it's just looking for things that you can verbally affirm the person for. There's an ancient Hebrew proverb that says life and death is in the power of the tongue. We can kill each other or give each other life by the way we talk. For some people, receiving affirming words is what really makes them feel loved. You give them negative words, it's like a dagger in their heart. Another love language is acts of service, doing something for the other person that they would like for you to do. In a marriage, that would be such things as cooking meals, washing dishes, vacuuming floors, washing cars, mowing grass, walking the dog, changing the baby's diaper. Woo, big act of service. Anything they would like for you to do. Remember the old saying, actions speak louder than words. If this is your love language, that's true. It's not true for everyone, but if that's your love language, actions will speak louder than words. And then there's gifts. It's universal to give gifts as an expression of love. The gift doesn't have to be expensive. We've always said it's the thought that counts. But I remind you, it's not the thought left in your head that counts. It's the gift that came out of the thought in your head. Okay? So gifts. And then number 4 would be quality time. Giving the person your undivided attention. I do not mean sitting on the couch watching television. Someone else has your attention. I'm talking about TV is off, computers are down, we're not answering the phone, we're looking at each other and having the kind of conversation I talked about earlier. Quality time. Doesn't mean you're always talking. You could be, in this season of the year, maybe out in the yard planting flowers together. But the important thing for this person is not the flowers. The important thing is you're spending time with them. They have your undivided attention. And then number 5 is physical touch. We've long known the emotional power of physical touch. That's why we pick up babies and hold them and kiss them and cuddle them. Long before the baby understands the meaning of the word love, the baby feels love by physical touch. In a marriage, that's such things as holding hands, kissing, embracing, the whole sexual part of the marriage, arm around the shoulder, driving down the road, you put your hand on their leg, sitting around the house and they walk by and you trip them. No, erase that one. Don't trip your spouse, okay? Here's the basic idea, very simply. Out of the 5, each of us has a primary love language. And if you don't speak your spouse's primary language, they will not feel loved, even though you're speaking some of the other languages. Simple concept makes a tremendous difference in the emotional climate of the marriage.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great overview. And I think we're finding probably several of those are being challenged during this time that we never even really had to think about before. I mean, just by the pure nature of what's going on right now, physical contact with other people, especially if you're an extrovert and that type thing is being, you basically just cannot do it. So we're all having to adapt. Maybe talk a little bit. I know we have a lot of families on the call as well, and kids and teenagers. What would you say, just to everybody, the kids and the parents, as far as some practical things maybe we can be doing right now? I know people are anxious. Kids may be a little anxious. Their whole routine, they can't get away from mom and dad and have their own time. What are some things that we can do during this time to promote, well-being for our kids and our entire family?
Yeah, well, I think again that would be influenced by the child's primary love language, because children have a primary love language as well, and you can discover a child's love language by the time they're 4 years old. Just observe their behavior. How do they respond to you? My son's love language is physical touch. He's grown now, but when he was little, he would run to the door when I came home and grab my leg and climb on me. He's touching me because he wants to be touched. Our daughter never did that. She would say, "Daddy, come to my room. I want to show you something." She wanted my undivided attention. So if you don't know your children's love language, have never thought of it along these lines, I would suggest this would be a great time to learn your child's love language. There is a quiz at 5lovelanguages.com. There's one for couples, there's one for children, there's one for teenagers, there's one for single adults. It's all free. And maybe all the kids could take the quiz and you could talk about this. And then the children learn. Mother has a love language, daddy has a love language, sister, and we have a love language. I mean, this could really create a very positive atmosphere in the home if we surface this idea and focus on speaking each child's love language. So, for example, if physical touch is a child's love language, you a small child, you sit on the couch, they're in your lap or sitting real close to you, and you're reading a book to them. You're doing physical touch and quality time. They have your undivided attention, and they love it. Another child wouldn't necessarily want to sit beside of you. They want to sit over here. You read me the book, but I'll sit over here. You discover their language, and during this season, think in terms of how can I express love in each child's love language. Now, please don't hear me saying that you only speak a child's primary love language. Give heavy doses of the primary. Sprinkle in the other 4, because we want the child to learn how to receive love and give love in all 5 languages. That's the healthiest adult. Most of us did not learn and did not receive all 5 love languages growing up. So we have to learn some of these as adults. But whether they're children or whether they're teenagers, focusing in on the love language can be extremely important during this time.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I know a lot of us, including Becca and me, we now have some of our adult children that are living back with us. That was unexpected. And it can be a great thing, but it can also be a challenge when, they've been used to being out on their own for maybe a year, maybe several years. And they find themselves, back in their parents' house during a time when they're being isolated from maybe a lot of their normal social network. Any kind of practical advice or tips you can give on maybe how we can have conversations with those adult children, or some of the things we need to be thinking about to kind of make it a smoother ride?
Yeah, I think first of all, don't treat them like they were teenagers in high school. They're adults now, and they've been out on their own. And yes, they've come back because they had to come back. And you love them as much as you've ever loved them, and hopefully they love you. I do think that a family conference in which we sit down with those college-age students, and we say, okay, we're all back together now, but let's talk a little bit and let's listen to each other about how we can make this really not only just work for us, but how we can make it good for all of us. So how about sharing your ideas of what I could do, Mom could do, and how we could do with each other that would really make this meaningful for you? Because I know you guys have studies to do, and I know you also, have friends. And so what can we do to make this better for you and work together as a team during this time? And I think listening to those college students share their ideas, and they'll have ideas, And hopefully you can come together for some really good ideas on things that would make it easier for them to study and easier for them to be in relationship with their friends, online. And then how you all could do things together that would be meaningful to them. And again, depending on the love language of that college age student, one of them might really, really enjoy taking a walk with you, just by yourself, taking a walk. And others, like my son, he never wanted to walk with me. My daughter wanted to walk. Quality time was her language. He said, walking is dumb. You're not going anywhere. If you're going somewhere, drive. What he wanted to do was play basketball. And the way we played basketball in the backyard, it was physical. So understanding the love language of the college student can help you, meet that need. And it may be different for different ones in terms of what you're actually doing, but you get their feedback and it'll help you know how to invest your time most effectively.
Great. I also want to remind everybody who's on the Zoom call that you can submit a question. If you just press the chat button, which should be on the bottom. If you're using a computer, it should be, I think, on the top. If you're using a phone or an iPad, if you just click chat, you can leave a question, and James will compile those and get those to me, and we'll definitely try to get some of those to Gary before our hour is up. So definitely want to make this as meaningful for everybody as we can, and be as specific as you can. So that's kind of the advantage of doing this format in just a Q&A versus a seminar. Gary, one thing I had thought of is, this crisis is so unique in that there's a health component. So we've got, anxiety from worrying about if loved ones are going to be sick or die potentially if they have health conditions, if, a family member is going to get sick. And there's also the financial component. A lot of guys I know, their incomes have been cut in a lot of cases significantly. A lot of people have been losing their jobs or been furloughed, obviously creating lots of different stress factors. With this being a little unique, are there anything we can be doing practically to help reduce that stress level or help each other through it?
Yeah, well, I think, a certain level of stress is to be expected when we're going through things that are so vastly different. In terms of the finances, if a couple before all of this had a reserve fund that they were going to use for rainy days, this is a rainy day. Okay. So you can begin to pull some of that out. But the people who did that will be less stressed about finances because they know they got enough tucked away. They can survive this, for a good while. Now, those who didn't have that and were just kind of living on their paycheck every week, it's going to be more stressful. And what they're going to have to think in terms of is, where do we cut back? Where do we cut back? I remember I was talking with a couple and they were trying to figure this out. And she was saying, well, honey, I think you ought to just drop your membership in the fitness club. It's several dollars a month and that would really help. And he was kind of reluctant to do that because, he enjoyed that part of life. But he wasn't going now because it's closed, and so he's paying dues, but it's closed. And so, there can be stress points when you talk about where do we cut back. But the reality is most people can live on less than they have been living on. It just means we have to decide which things are we going to cut it back on so that we can have enough to meet the necessities of life. But, the real issue here is not the money. The real issue is how I'm feeling about our financial situation and how you're feeling about our financial situation. You see, one of us might be really stressed out because, we're just very conscientious and we tend to think the worst and we can see ourselves getting into real trouble here and we're just really disturbed. And the other person can be feeling, fairly calm. Yeah, I know I know we've got to make some changes here, but, I think we're going to be all right. And hearing each other's feelings in our conversation will help us to be empathetic with the other person, because we have different personalities, and when we come to crises, we, just like in a death situation, we grieve in different ways. Then also in a crisis like this over finances or anything else, we tend to feel differently about it. So being open to the other person's feelings and expressing understanding, honey, I can see how that would be stressful for you. Yeah. With my personality, it's not as stressful, but I can certainly understand that. What could I do, or is there anything I can do that would make this easier for you? So if we have the attitude of we're in this thing to serve each other, to help each other, and we're affirming their feelings, we're not condemning them, we're not preaching to them and saying, well, you shouldn't be feeling that way, God's going to take care of us, It's not the time to preach, okay? But to say, I can understand that, honey. What could I do? Anything I could do that might be helpful? I'm with you. We're in this thing together. It's those kind of conversations that can help us process our concerns about finances.
Yeah. Thank you, Gary. And yeah, I think it's now not a time to, beat each other up if there were some things we should have done before this happened that maybe have put us in a little bit of a rough spot as well. But, use it to, to try to do some of the practical things to put us in a better situation. And still there's a lot of things I think we can be grateful for. So,
yeah.
Well, Gary, the questions are now rolling in, so I'm going to try to use the rest of our time to have you answer some of these questions, and we've got some really interesting ones. I thought this one was interesting. It says, how do the love languages change over time, especially with children? So do you see that people's love languages change over time, especially maybe from youth to adult, or do you see them primarily staying the same?
I think that basically our love language stays with us for a lifetime, just like many other personality traits. But having said that, I think there are times, certain seasons of life or circumstances, where another love language may jump to the top. For example, a mother that has 2 preschool children, acts of service may not be her primary language, but during those years, it's probably going to jump to the top because she's overwhelmed. Now, the same principle is true now in this crisis, especially if you have children at home, young children at home. Before this happened, they were off in school for a good bit of the day. Now they're there 24/7. And if the wife's love language was not acts of service, it may well be now, because she's feeling overwhelmed, or maybe he's feeling overwhelmed if he's the one that's primarily looking after the children. So pitching in and helping or asking, how can I help, would really, really speak loudly to them at this time. So I think in certain seasons or certain circumstances, another love language can jump to the top. Let's say, for example, that a family member dies in the midst of all of this. Maybe not even an immediate family, but an extended family. And maybe your spouse's parent, for example. Physical touch may not be their primary love language, but when they get that word that the family member is deceased, you're holding them and letting them cry on your shoulder may be the most important way to express love to them at that moment. So, yeah, I think there's situations where the love language may change, but typically it tends to stay with us for a lifetime.
Interesting. I've gotten a couple questions about dating, and so I think we do have some people on the call that are in a relationship but not married. And I've gotten 2 questions, maybe 3, that are sort of similar. I'll try to just kind of put them together. But basically, how can people who are dating, who are interested in this, how can they talk about the 5 love languages and get to know each other's 5 love languages while still trying to respect the other person's boundaries?
Yeah, I do have a book on the 5 love languages for singles, and it's the same 5 languages, but it relates to the single adult, both in relationship to their parents, their siblings, their college roommates, or their dating partners. Because, in the dating relationship, particularly when you get to that phase where you're in love or you're thinking we're in love, you have these strong euphoric feelings, Those last about 2 years. If you date long enough, you'll come down off the high before you get married. If you understand each other's love language and are speaking it during the dating process, chances are when you come down off the high, you won't see that as a sign that we shouldn't get married. Because you'll be speaking each other's language, you'll still be feeling loved by the other person, and you can make a more intelligent decision about whether to move to marriage or not to move to marriage. So it really is helpful in the dating relationship. Now, if during this season you're not able to get together and you're separated geographically, one of the things I discovered when I wrote the military version of the 5 love languages is how to speak the love languages long distance when you're deployed, for example. And we have tremendous illustrations in that book because we got them from military couples who already knew the love languages and had learned how to do this. For example, you would think that physical touch would be impossible if you're half a world away. But one wife said, while he was deployed, I put my hand on a sheet of paper, I traced my hand, and I mailed it to him with a note that said, "Put your hand on my hand. I want to hold your hand." When he came home, he said, "Gary, every time I put my hand on that paper, I felt her." It's not literal touch, it's emotional touch, but that's what we're talking about. So I think even in a dating relationship, you can think in terms of that sort of thing. And of course, today we have the wonderful advantage that we're using tonight, and that is all the online things. So you can still talk to each other. You can still look at each other on FaceTime. It's much easier today to keep a relationship going when you have to be separated than it was, when I was growing up, because none of that was available, of course, in those years. So understanding this concept with single adults and particularly with dating individuals. In fact, I'm running into a lot of dating couples. One of them will say to me, on our second date, she told me I had to read this book. I said, man, you got a good girl there, or a good guy there. But it is important for single adults and in the dating relationship to understand the concept and learn each other's language.
Great. I've got, well, this is an interesting one. They said that they have found that 1 or 2 of the languages they didn't receive as a child are the ones they want most and feel like they're missing in their adult life. Any thoughts on that?
Well, that could certainly be true. I'm often asked, how does the love language develop? And I don't know. Is it nature or is it nurture? I know, as I said earlier, it's there early. At least by 4 years old, you can determine their love language. So it's there early. But it also may, what this question is asking may well be true. It may be that we did not receive those love languages. And as we're adult and looking at life, we're craving those things. So that maybe that had a part in it. On the flip side of that, maybe our love language as adults is what we did receive as a child. That, we really felt loved, and so now it's still what we want to feel loved. So I don't have a good answer to how does it develop. And of course, the important thing is, what is it? What is it now? And learning to speak that language.
I've gotten several questions that relate around the topic of, I know my primary love language, and I'm pretty good at giving that to my spouse or significant other. But how do I develop more aptitude in learning about the other love languages that aren't mine, my primary ones, and but they could be my spouse's, or they could just be ones that I'll, want to bring out of the toolbox when I meet somebody, and you kind of know that this is their primary thing. Yeah.
Well, it is true that by nature, we speak our own love language easily. That is what makes us feel love, we tend to do for others. If words is my love language, then I will probably just freely, naturally give words to other people. In fact, that's what I did to my wife. My love language is words of affirmation. I didn't know that when we were married, of course. But when we got married, I would give her words of affirmation. I'd tell her how nice she looked, how much I appreciated what she did. I'd tell her a dozen times a day, I love you, honey. I am so glad I married you. And so I was giving her words of affirmation. Of course, that was not her love language. I didn't know anything about that. But after a while, she said to me, you keep saying, I love you, I love you. If you love me, why don't you help me? Looking back on it, her love language was acts of service. But yeah, I think we naturally speak our own love language. But here's the good news. We can learn to speak any of these love languages as an adult, even if we did not receive them as a child. And the important thing in the relationship is that you learn how to speak the love language of your spouse. And sometimes their number one is your number five. It's just really not very meaningful to you, but it's number one for them. And if you didn't receive that growing up, it'll be a learning curve, but you can learn to do it. For example, I've had men say to me, her love language is the words of affirmation. I just don't say those things. I mean, I love her, I appreciate it, but I just can't say those things. Okay, then get you a sheet of paper and let's write down some things that you could say to her, okay? And maybe it's things you've heard other people say, or maybe your counselor can write you out a few, or you can read a book and stand in front of the mirror by yourself and read them out loud. Hear yourself saying those things, and then memorize one of them and walk in the room where she is one day when she's looking the other way and just say it. And then you can run. You break the silence. And the second time is easier, and the third time is easier. Listen, it's difficult to learn another language. If you want to learn to speak Spanish and you don't speak Spanish, it's going to take some effort. And it'll take some effort to learn your spouse's love language, learn to speak it. But you can. And it's step by step, and it becomes more comfortable for you. But it's worth the effort, because when you both feel love and you're connecting with each other, it creates an atmosphere that you wanted to have when you got married. It's loving, it's supportive, it's caring. I mean, you feel connected, and you really can face whatever crisis we're in when you have that kind of connection.
Absolutely. Gary, I've gotten a couple questions, and this may not be specifically a love language question, but asking about what does it look like to make sure that we're keeping God first and in the center with my wife, my kids, my family during this time of crisis?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, we have to make sure we have our individual relationship with God, vibrant. And one of the things that, for me, at least through all these years, has been so helpful to me is to have a daily sit-down time with God. Now, I talk to God throughout the day about things, but a sit-down time, for me, it's in the morning. It can be other times, in which I take a chapter in the Bible, and I say, God, I'm going to read this. I'm listening to you. Whatever I need to hear, I want to hear it. And I take my pen, I underline things that maybe jump out at me. I go back and talk to God about them. And it's like God and I are having a conversation. And I just work my way through the Bible. And when I get through with one translation, I work through another translation. So that personal time with God, that sit-down time with God, I think is so, so important for me individually. But then in terms of the relationship, sharing with each other, like husband and wife, for example, sharing with each other, maybe something you read in the Bible that day that you found helpful. I don't mean preaching to them. I don't mean, I read the Bible this morning, you need to hear this, woman. I don't mean that. No. I mean, here's something that encouraged me today. Let me share it with you. And we share with each other what our own experience with God. Another thing I think that many couples have never learned how to do, and that is pray together. And I encourage couples who've never prayed together to start by praying silently. Just hold hands, close your eyes, pray silently. When you get through, you say amen out loud so they'll know you're through. You hang on till they say amen. Most couples can do that. Yeah, I can do that. Okay. Well, what'll happen is 6 months down the road, perhaps one of you will slip up and pray out loud. And now you broke the sound barrier. But if you never break the sound barrier, it'll help your relationship if you pray silently. You cannot come to God together every day and it not begin to affect the way you treat each other. Okay? Now, in terms of the family, obviously depends on the age of the children, but I think establishing a daily time in which we read some scripture, or if they're little, we read a Bible story, and we have some prayer time together. Our children who are grown now look back on those early days, and they say, Mom and Dad, those were the most meaningful times. We look back, we remember how we read those Bible stories, how we talked about it, how we prayed together. And every night what we did, when we put them to bed, my wife or I, one, would go to the bed, kneel by their bed, we would pray and let them pray. And both of our kids look back and say that was so meaningful to us. So establishing that as a part of the daily routine of life, so that the child, at least every day, is consciously thinking about God and our relationship with God. So those are things I think that really can enhance the spiritual relationship that we have with God and each other.
Great. Thanks, Gary. Just a note, I know there's some background noise that we were hearing there. If somebody is on a 925 area code and you are a call-in, if you can make sure your line is muted. We've been hearing some noise, I think, maybe communicating one of the love languages to your children in the background. But if we could make sure that your phone is muted, we would really appreciate that. I think we're trying to do that the best we can, but I think our host is having to scroll through 500, names to try to find, where we need to mute. So we're doing the best we can. We appreciate the patience. So Gary, another question I've gotten is, you've been doing this a long time. You came up with the love languages, I think more than 25 years ago. Do you see now that if you could go back and do it, would you add in a sixth love language, or do you think the 5 pretty much covers it?
Well, I have had people suggest a sixth love language. One husband said, Dr. Chapman, there's a sixth love language. I said, what is it? He said, chocolate. I said, well, if they bought it, it's a gift. If they made it, it's an act of service, okay? And another guy said, her love language is going shopping with her, And I said, well, it sounds to me like that's a dialect of quality time. She wants your undivided attention. She wants you to be with her doing something she enjoys doing. So I'm not saying there's not a sixth love language. I'm just saying that through these years, I haven't discovered one that I think is a distinct love language. Obviously, all of these have many dialects within the languages. But I was never dogmatic. These were just the 5 that I discovered in my counseling and my research. So if there is a 5, 6, I'm open to it. Okay?
Gotcha. And again, if somebody, who's on the line with the 925 area code could please mute their line. And Jay, if you have the ability to mute that, we would appreciate it. I know you're in control, man. You're our Zoom master.
We're searching.
Counting on you. So Gary, I've gotten some questions. Basically, if you're really wanting to figure out what somebody's love language is, but they're not willing to take a test, like a child or maybe a late teen that's just, I don't want to do this. I guess you can observe, but what's the best way to try to determine what their love language is?
Yeah. Three basic ways informally. One would be what we've already said, and that is observe their behavior. How do they typically respond to other people? If a teenager, for example, is always giving high fives to everybody, that's a chance that physical touch is their language. If you hear them giving affirming words to people, then words is probably their language. So observe. But there's 2 other things. One is, what do they complain about most often? For example, I remember my mother telling me that her 6-year-old son said to her, "We don't ever go to the park anymore since the baby came." His language was quality time. He and his mother used to go to the park together, just the 2 of them. Now the baby's here and we're not getting that quality time. So what do they complain about most often? If you, for example, go on a business trip or you're out of town and you come home and your spouse or your teenager says, "You didn't bring me anything," they're telling you that gifts is their love language. So what do they complain about? Think about it with your spouse. What do they complain about? And you're a teenager or a child or anyone, what do they complain about? And then the third question is, what do they request most often? The request reveals the love language. For example, my teenage daughter would say to me, "Dad, can we take a walk after dinner?" She said that regularly. And my response would be, "Honey, I'll be glad to take a walk with you as soon as I wash dishes for your mother." Okay? Because my wife's language is acts of service. Get mama happy, and then I'll walk with you. So what do they request most often? You put those three things together, observing their behavior, what they complain about, and what they request. You can pretty well figure out a person's love language.
Good advice. Hey, Gary, I've gotten a couple questions in the same vein. And it relates to, do you think it's easier, are we naturally more compatible with someone who has the same love tract?
Repeat the question there, Todd, because I think we finally got everyone muted, and then that included you. So
Great.
Repeat the question, and then we'll make sure Gary's unmuted.
Gary's unmuted too. Perfect. Yep. Perfect. Yeah, the question was, I got a few questions relating to, is it easier to love or be compatible with someone with the same primary love language as you? Or like they say, do opposites attract? And in a similar way, like if you're dating and you just can't seem to be communicating because you have such different love languages, do you just throw your hands up and say you're not compatible, or is there something you can do?
Well, I do think that if a couple happens to have the same love language, it should be easier for them, because as I said, we tend to speak our own love language. However, here's what I've observed. If couples do have the same love language, often, in fact, almost always, they will have different dialects within that language. For example, a wife said to me some time ago, she said, "Gary, my husband and I have the same love language." I said, "Really? What is it?" She said, "Acts of service." But she said, "The things that I want him to do for me that make me feel loved are different from the things he wants me to do for him to make him feel loved." So same love language, just different dialects. So yes, it should be easier for that couple. But the reality is, seldom does a husband and wife have the same love language. Far more likely that you'll have a different love language. And maybe it goes back to what you said, and that is that opposites tend to attract. And I don't know why that is, but except that we like to see in other people who are strong in an area where we might be weak, and we admire that in them. But at any rate, seldom does a husband and wife have the same love language. In a dating relationship, I think if the other person is not willing to speak your love language after they understand the concept, and they just say, "Well, I'm not going to do that," that's a pretty good sign that this relationship's not going to be moving in a positive direction. I mean, do you want to live with a person who knows how to love you and chooses not to do it? I mean, to me, that would be a red flag waving. This relationship probably should not be going forward. Now, if you get in a marriage situation and you surface this concept of the love language, and the spouse says, "I don't believe in all that stuff. You know, I don't believe in all that stuff," and they won't even listen to you. That's a troubled situation, to be sure, because your spouse is telling you, as a man said to me one time, he said, "Gary, I took your quiz. My wife talked me into it. I took the quiz. She took the quiz, and she told me her love language is acts of service. But I'm going to tell you and her, if it's going to take my washing dishes and vacuuming floors for her to feel love, she can forget that." I said to him, "That's your choice. If you want to live with a wife who has an empty love tank, that's your choice." I said, "I much prefer to live with a wife who has a full love tank." I've lived with both. Same woman, okay? Early days, empty love tank. Latter years, full love tank. I much prefer to live with a woman that has a full love tank. So if it's going to take washing dishes and vacuuming floors, man, let me at it. It's a small price to pay for a happy woman. You see, the person who takes that attitude that I'm not going to speak their love language certainly does not have the attitude of Christ, because Christ stepped down from all of his glory on level ground with us. And when he got on level ground, he stepped down even further to death on a cross. And we're challenged to have the same attitude of Christ. You know, really, this is what makes a marriage work, is whether we have an attitude of serving each other. This really is what changed my own marriage, because we were struggling. You know, I mean, we struggled, we argued, we just, you know, I felt often I'd married the wrong person. It's never going to work out. When I finally said to God, I don't know what else to do, there came to my mind a visual image of Jesus on his knees, washing the feet of his disciples. And I heard God say, that's the problem in your marriage. You don't have the attitude of serving your wife. Hit me like a ton of bricks. Because I remember what Jesus said when he stood up. He said to them, I'm your leader. And in my kingdom, this is the way you lead. The leader serves. And I said, God, forgive me. Yeah, I've missed the whole point. Please give me the attitude of Christ toward my wife. In retrospect, it's the greatest prayer I ever prayed about my marriage, because God changed my heart and gave me a desire to serve her. I started asking her 3 questions, and they're simple questions, but they literally changed our marriage. Question number 1 was, honey, how can I help you? Question number 2, how can I make your life easier? Question number 3, how can I be a better husband? And when I asked those questions, she was willing to give me answers. Now, looking back on it, she really was teaching me how to love her. She was teaching me her love language, but I didn't know anything about that. But when I started responding to those things, you know what happened? Not overnight, but within 3 months, my wife started asking me those 3 questions. How can I help you? How can I make your life easier? How can I be a better wife? We've been walking this road a long time now, and I have an incredible wife. In fact, I said to her recently, you know, Carolyn, if every woman in the world was like you, there'd never be a divorce. Why would a man leave a woman who is doing everything she can to help him? And my goal through these years has been to so serve my wife, and when I'm gone, she'll never find another man to treat her the way I've treated her. The woman's going to miss me. But I believe this is what God intended. Husband and wife who are serving each other, loving each other, serving each other. And when you do, you both become winners. You know, in the early days, we were both losers. I shot her, she shot me. We stayed wounded most of the time. But when we did it God's way, you both become winners. And then, that's not the end. Then the 2 of you can turn and bless the world with the abilities God has given you. So that's my challenge to Christians, is ask God to give you the attitude of Christ towards your spouse. And when you get it going both ways, you're going to have the marriage you wanted to have, whether you're in a crisis or whether you're not in a crisis.
Wow, Gary, that was so powerful. We were trying to decide, okay, what, you know, is our last question to close this thing out, and you just absolutely nailed it by every direction. So I think we're going to take that as the closing question and answer. And we just really can't express to you how much we appreciate your time, your heart, leaving us with those words and that vision of, you know, humbling ourselves to try to be Jesus, you know, as best we can to our spouse, to our families. And that's an image I think we can all carry with us. James, Gary, thanks again. You know, if we want to do another one of these, if we're in lockdown 2 months from now, you game to do a follow-up?
Sure, I can do whatever. James, you might find somebody else, though, to give you another perspective. That's okay, too. I would just say this. Whatever you learn that helps you in your marriage, share it with somebody else. Don't keep it to yourself. Share it with somebody else, because the world needs help. And when we can get marriages going in the right direction in our country, we're doing the greatest thing we can be doing, not only for our country, but for God and for the people that we're trying to help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I had several questions that just came in about repeating those 3 questions on your last answer. And so I think they were, how can I help you? How can I make your life easier? Mm-hmm. And how can I be a better spouse to you? Is that correct?
That's it. You got it. Yeah.
Okay, good. We'll email those to every one of the NCS men, because I think we all need it. Anyway, guys, amazing questions. And Gary, we're obviously very blessed by your input here. And we obviously have a great need because there are a tremendous amount of excellent questions here. So yeah, we may have to schedule a group therapy for 500-600 people. Get a break on the billable hours. That'd be great. So again, to the wives, thank you so much. You make all of the men look so much better. I was scrolling through and thinking, my God, did that guy marry up? So thank you to all of you. A tremendous amount of just wives and ladies that joined. I'm really pleased to see you guys there. I think a good godly man holds a high view of women, and that's something we certainly promote. And we've loved having you guys on this call. A tremendous number of you are in dating relationships or single. And, we applaud that you have invested in this time for your own future, because it's certainly a lot of things that I would have wanted to know before I got married or should have known. I paid a lot of money to learn about it in counseling. So this would have been much cheaper. Anyway, so thank you everyone who did this. Really appreciate you being on, taking the time, asking great questions. And Gary, you've blessed us, and continue to use your tremendous expertise and talent and teaching ability to help us, especially us big dumb animals that are men. So
well, thank you, James. It was good to be with you. And again, I appreciate what all New Canaan Society, what you guys are doing. It's just an absolutely incredible ministry. So keep up the good work.
Thank you. And like Todd said, we talked about this on Friday, and it came together in less than a week. So really appreciate you just making that happen for us. So Todd and Jay, thank you for helping host and promote and get this out.
Yeah.
I'm going to just
James,
close.
if everything goes according to plan, we should have a recording too. So you can send out a link to
Yes,
everybody.
I will be sending a recording. So, and with, that'll come with apologies to the other 100 people that did not get on. So, anyway, let me just close this in prayer, and then we'll head into our night. This will make for great dinner conversation. So, Father God, thanks for how you made Gary, how you made him curious, how you gave him clarity to learn and formulate and boil down relationships, which are such a massive, huge breadth of topics, and how you helped him boil it down to 5 handles that we can really grab onto about ourselves and our spouses and our kids and our parents and the people who work for us and with us. It's really tremendous. Father, you are a relational 3-in-1 God. And so relationships are truly a virtue of your love for us and how you want us to understand you. So that this could not be a more relevant topic as we seek you, we shape ourselves to be more like you. Our spouses help us shape ourselves and smooth us into more godly people. And I just pray that as we do this, I pray for great receptivity as in these discussions. I pray especially for humility for those of us who need to hear things that are maybe hard to hear, or things we don't want to hear, or those of us that wish I had a different love language, or that she or he had a different love language, and help us to be graceful and grace-filled and loving, and have a view, Father, of your tremendous patience with us as we do this. So, Father, you're good to us to give us these things and to teach us about yourselves and ourselves, to teach us about yourself and ourselves. And so in this, we hope this time glorified you and your Son. And that was our goal. And we pray all this in his name. Amen.
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 Thank you,
Thanks,
guys.
Gary.
Okay, thank
Hey,
you.
the next,
God
the
bless.
next
Amen.
time,
Shalom, shalom.
we're gonna
Shalom,
have 10,
thank you.
the 10 love language from the Middle East. How to treat 10.
Sign us off, Jay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gary. That was great.